Okay, guys, this kind of goes over what I went over the other day about the whole Vance, all of them. And you need to watch this. It's really important. It's going to explain a lot, and it's also going to explain to you why the lawsuits won't work. I told you that they're wasting their fucking time, so watch this. Oh, I'll put a link in the comments if you want to watch the whole thing because it's really long.
Power and who gets to wield power in the 21st century. There's a new extreme ideology that has taken root in certain quarters of Silicon Valley, not in all tech, but in a pretty significantly impactful portion of tech. And it sees that the 21st century is a power vacuum, and it proposes to fill that power vacuum with a new system of governance by tech corporations and the people who control those corporations. And that's very much what this is about that we're seeing today. It's about who controls the 21st century, who has power. And it's also about the idea of upending nation states, countries like the United States no longer being important in the world, and instead having different patchworks of territories, some call them network states, that will be ruled like corporate fiefdoms by some of these tech billionaires.
So talk about what I will describe as Elon Musk's ideological daddy, also J.D.Vance's ideological daddy. Steve Bannon has talked about this guy glowingly. Talk about Curtis Yarvin, who's like the main guy behind all of this ideologically and philosophically, and what his grand vision is.
Well, Curtis Yarvin is a computer programmer from San Francisco who, back in the early 2000s, used to write an online blog as a guy named Minchia Smallbug. That was his moniker. And he has all of these kind of convoluted, confusing, and cherry-picked theories about the need to replace democracy with corporate-ruled monarchies. He used to really refer to it as monarchy and the need to return to monarchism and basically systems of kings. He seems to have upgraded his language to be more framed as a corporate takeover. And his theory is that democracy has failed, and what we need is to run governments in the world like a corporation with CEO dictators who are empowered to have absolute control over the lives of their citizens, and that's just the way things should run. And he's written these ideas out. Now he has a Substack called Gray Mirror, where he regularly writes these long essays about overthrowing the current system of governance and instituting this sort of tech authoritarianism, I think it's fair to call it. In one essay from, I think, 2008, he talks about turning San Francisco into a territory called Frisk Court, where you have to swipe in and swipe out with a card, and everything you do, everything you look at, everything is captured on a total surveillance system that ensures the safety of every citizen. So basically reinventing Orwell's Big Brother. Curtis Yarvin seems to think he's really brilliant. I think most people with knowledge of politics and history don't see that at all. They see a guy who's really misreading a lot of things to fit his own crazy theories. Unfortunately, people like Peter Thiel do consider him very important. Mark Andreessen, as you mentioned, Bannon and others. And so right now what we're kind of seeing is his theories being put into practice, although you don't really see that or hear that in any of the coverage of it. And so basically what you have is a guy who was a blogging troll in the 2000s become a major political philosopher for some of the richest men in the world who are now wielding power within the Trump administration.
Yeah, we should just point out that, to your point, these people now have political power. This isn't theoretical anymore. I mean, you mentioned a couple of billionaires there, Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel. These are all people who were just recently on the #1 podcast in the world, the Joe Rogan Experience, where Joe Rogan sat there and nodded along in agreement to them for 3 hours straight,
right,
as they lied about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the National Labor Relations Board. So they have political power, and they also have cultural sway based on massive outflow of misinformation that they're putting out there on a regular basis.
So when I read Curtis Yarvin's the book, The Dark Enlightenment, and I was really starting to dig into these characters as Elon Musk became increasingly influential in the Trump campaign and funneling, an insane amount of money, $250 million, probably more, into the Trump campaign. I was really thinking that the model he had in mind was Trump as the sort of CEO dictator. But it seems now that actually it's Elon who is put into that role. And Trump is the secondary, sort of almost like ceremonial position of more like the chairman of the board. Talk about the political and power dynamic between those two.
Well, in 2022, Yarvin wrote an essay called The Glorified Revolution, in which he outlined the idea for, instead of Trump in a second administration being at the center of everything, Trump would more act as chairman of the board, and he would install a sort of CEO figure to basically be the dictator of the federal bureaucracy and to start breaking rules, purging the bureaucracy, which is a long-time idea of Yarvin's. He calls it RAGE, retire all government employees. We see that being carried out in DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which I prefer to call destruction of government by Elon, because that's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Then after purging the bureaucracy, you bring in this loyalist army of people to run government with no concern for loyalty to democracy or the Constitution or the law, but instead loyalty to the dictator who runs the government now. And then you start systematically dismantling democratic institutions, making sure they no longer function, they no longer exist. You defy the courts, you defy Congress, you push everything to the brink and see who really does anything about it. Is there any consequence for deciding that Congress doesn't matter anymore? Is there any consequence for deciding that you don't have to follow the laws, especially when you have a president who will just pardon you? And then after that, you start seizing media control, academic control, and sort of reformatting everything so that the main message getting out to people is pro-authoritarian regime, pro-dictatorship, and it's very hard to get any competing message out. We're not quite at that stage yet. We do see some weird stuff happening, the way the Washington Post and the LA Times have owners now who have become sort of pro-MAGA, or at least kowtowing to MAGA. Mm-hmm. And I think you expect to see more of that pressure applied to both journalism and to academia and other institutions. The idea being that we can have nobody publicly challenge this. People have to act like it's normal and go along with it, and that'll give it the best chance of success.
Well, and we've seen some of that already. I mean, the FCC is going after NPR and PBS. They required the transcript to be released of that Kamala Harris interview. Trump himself has been suing various media organizations, and then in several instances, those media organizations, rather than fight, would have likely been winning battles in court because, of course, very hard to prove, defamation. There's all kinds of First Amendment protections. Instead, they've just effectively bent the knee, issued what amounts to a bribe to Trump in the hopes that they can, get their mergers through and go along to get along and not attract his scrutiny or have their executives investigated and potentially jailed.
Yeah, they're self-censoring. It's authoritarianism through fear is what we're witnessing. You pointed out with CBS, they paid him $50 million in the hopes of saying, hey, we're cool. We saw Mark Zuckerberg do that with a $25 million bribe for temporarily banning him for January 6th, which of course was perfectly reasonable.
So the only way through this is to immediately start to fight back and be resistant to the normalization of this kind of stuff. And it's been very disappointing to see so many media outlets fall short and trying to find some mythical middle ground that does not exist. To be in the middle ground with these people, you have to be so far to the right that you have effectively abandoned all neutrality and objectivity. And I think there are a bunch of low IQ cowards running a lot of our media institutions today. And I think if this country loses its democracy, it will be largely due to the failure of journalism to do its job. And I say this as someone who wanted to be a journalist since the 5th grade, and who now wonders if the term journalist won't make people think very low of me, that I'm cowardly or else stupid. So, I think that's been a big part of it. There has been no effective pushback. Part of that has been not telling people what's actually going on. But these people have been talking about this for a long time. It's not chaos. It's systematic. There's a plan. I've compared this to, it's like trying to tell the story of 9/11 without mentioning Al-Qaeda. This wasn't just a bunch of random people who decided to do the same thing at the same time. There's a much deeper idea here. And it's not just the tech guys. We're seeing the right-wing religious establishment as a part of this, the Heritage Foundation. There's a real sort of convening of these right-wing powers that want to remake the world. And they have found common ground. And we're watching them do that. The idea for purging the government appears in Yarvin, back in 2012. Well, it's also in Project 2025 spelled out.
That's right.
And they denied all this and were able to get away with it. And now we're living through it.